The Bobcat hadn't moved for 72 hours. In the farthest corner of the enclosure at the Colorado Wildlife Stabilization Unit, a young male bobcat crouched so tight against the steel wall it looked like part of the structure. The team had stopped trying to coax him out. Food was left untouched. Water evaporated. When the lights were off, the cameras showed him pacing in slow, painful circles, but only during the deepest hours of night. They called him Ash. He had been pulled from the wreckage of a collapsed ranger station after the Colwood blaze swept through Boulder County. The firefighters who found him assumed he was dead, until one of them saw a single amber eye blink. His paws were scorched. Most of his fur along the flank was singed off, and his lungs were so damaged from smoke they weren't sure he'd survived the first night. Physically, Ash was stabilizing. But emotionally, he was unreachable. "He doesn't react to us at all," said Dr. Karen Ellis, the facility's trauma specialist. "No growls, no lunges, not even a twitch. He just folds into the corner." Interns were instructed not to approach the enclosure without supervision. Even the most experienced handlers kept their distance. They knew wild animals could shut down. But this was something different. "He's dissociating," Karen explained. "It's not just fear. He's emotionally disconnected. He's not here." The medical team rotated shifts. Everyone had a theory. Some said time would heal him. Others believed he'd never recover. Ash hadn't responded to anyone, not even when a fawn was placed in the adjacent enclosure to stimulate curiosity. Nothing. But on the morning of the 22nd day, everything changed. It was supposed to be a routine equipment check. Nothing more. But when Eric Saunders, a wildfire logistics officer, stepped into the hallway of the wildlife facility, something strange happened. He wasn't there for Ash. He had come to drop off maps for the rehabilitation team, records of recent animal displacement routes after the fires. But as he walked past Ash's enclosure, he stopped. His boots scuffed to a halt on the tile. Slowly, he turned his head, and the bobcat, silent for weeks, looked up. A full turn of the head. No flinch. No panic. Just eye contact. Eric froze. He had seen many animals after fires, worked alongside field biologists during evacuations. But this look, it wasn't random. It was fixed, recognizing, as if the creature inside that enclosure had been waiting for something, or someone. Eric took one quiet step closer to the glass. The bobcat didn't retreat. Instead, Ash lifted his head further and blinked. Not in exhaustion, in recognition. Karen Ellis was halfway down the hall when she saw him, the man standing still as a tree outside Ash's enclosure. "Sir?" she called cautiously. "Can I help?" Eric lifted one hand slowly, eyes never leaving the glass. "Don't move too fast. He's watching me." Karen stopped. She glanced into the enclosure and immediately felt her chest tighten. Ash wasn't in the corner. The bobcat was upright, not tense, not crouched, just sitting. His ears were pointed forward, his amber eyes unblinking, and for the first time since arriving, he wasn't facing the wall. He was facing a human. "You know him?" Karen asked, stepping closer. Eric hesitated. "No," he said. "I mean, I don't think so. But—" He looked down at his fire-resistant jacket, still carrying the soot, char, and pine smoke from 1,000 miles of wildfire zones. "I've been on fire recovery crews all summer. Lost count of how many rescues we assisted with. But this guy," he leaned in slightly. "There's something about him." Karen looked from Eric to Ash. "He's never done this before. Ever." "Let me try something," Eric said quietly. Before she could object, he walked back down the hall, returned with a folding chair, and set it across from the enclosure. He didn't sit directly in front. He angled slightly, kept his body low, and sat with a sigh, the kind of sigh that carried too many months of smoke, mud, adrenaline, and regret. Then he started to talk. Softly, no eye contact. He spoke of fires, not in technical terms, in feelings, about the roaring silence of trees collapsing, about the small raccoon they pulled from an irrigation pipe that didn't make it, about the fox kit they saved near the Poudre River who clung to his glove like a baby. And slowly, Ash began to change. His ears tilted, angling toward Eric's voice. His breathing steadied. At one point, the Bobcat stood fully and walked to the center of the enclosure, never breaking eye contact. Karen whispered into her radio, "Get Dr. Halsey. Now." Eric continued, "You were there, weren't you? Somewhere in the thick of it. Maybe under a ridge. Maybe near that Ranger tower that burned to the frame." His voice cracked slightly. "I know what it smells like. I know what it feels like to be surrounded by it." Ash stopped walking. His front paw rested just a foot from the edge of the enclosure glass. And then, as if moved by something deeper than memory, he laid down, not in the corner, not in fear, but in front of Eric, relaxed, still watching. Dr. Halsey arrived, stunned silent by what he saw. "That cat's been unreachable for almost a month," he said softly. Karen nodded. "Until now." The next morning, Eric came back. Same boots, same smoke-worn jacket, same steady calm. The wildlife team didn't stop him. Karen just nodded silently as he passed. She had already reviewed the security footage a dozen times overnight. None of them could explain it. Ash wasn't just calmer, he was engaged. When Eric sat, Ash approached the front of the enclosure again. Slow, deliberate steps. He still kept his distance, but he didn't retreat. He didn't shake. He didn't hide. This time, Eric brought something new, a scorched strip of canvas. A cut section of his old fire shelter, still faintly smelling of burned pine and dust. He laid it gently on the floor just outside the enclosure's glass. Ash's nose twitched. And then he pressed his front paw, the one that had taken weeks to heal, gently against the glass, directly in front of the shelter scrap. "I was there," Eric said quietly. "I think you were too." Karen, watching from behind the monitors, pulled up Ash's intake report again. His ID had no record of specific rescue personnel, just a general tag. Recovered post-Callwood fire zone. Eric squinted, remembering. "The ridge," he whispered. "North of Ridgeway Pass. There was a cluster of collapsed structures and one Bobcat." He closed his eyes. "We thought he didn't make it. But one of the interns checked again. He had a heartbeat. Barely." He opened his eyes and looked at Ash, who was still watching him. "I carried him out," Eric said, voice breaking, "wrapped in a mylar blanket like a child. I never got to know where he ended up. I didn't even ask." Ash stepped back, then walked in a small circle. Not frantic, just pacing. Then slowly he curled up in full view. "Karen," Eric said, still not looking away. "I don't think it's just recognition. I think it's memory, and scent, and sound, all of it." Karen spoke gently into her radio. "Confirm match with Ridgeway Pass Rescue. We may have a direct field contact." That night, something even more unexpected happened. Eric stayed late again, sitting outside the enclosure, reading aloud from a field journal about animal migration. Nothing dramatic, no therapy, just his voice, steady and warm. And when he closed the book, Ash walked toward the glass, and let out a low, quiet chirp, not a growl, not a warning. A sound Karen had only ever heard from a bobcat who trusted you. "He knows," she whispered. "Somewhere inside he knows." 2 days later, the team approved what they never had before. Under close supervision and with tranquilizers prepared just in case, Eric Saunders was cleared to step inside Ash's enclosure. The room was quiet, no lights beyond a gentle amber glow. Karen, Dr. Halsey, and 2 other staff members watched through the reinforced observation window, barely breathing. Eric entered slowly. He wore the same boots, the same jacket. He carried nothing but a soft-folded blanket and a calmness that made the room feel warmer. Ash stood near the far end at first, not hiding, just watching. Eric knelt slowly, placing the blanket on the floor. Then he sat cross-legged beside it, not looking directly at Ash. He waited. Minutes passed. No sound but the faint whir of the air vent. Then Ash moved. He stepped forward with deliberate, quiet precision, one paw, then the next. His amber eyes locked onto Eric, but there was no tension, only calculation, memory. testing. 3 feet away. Then 2. Then Ash lay down, not in submission, not in fear, but in full view just beside the blanket, his body angled toward Eric, tail curled in a slow, relaxed loop. His breathing was steady, eyes half-lidded, and for the first time since his rescue, his body was at peace. Karen pressed her hand to her mouth. "I've never seen anything like this," whispered Dr. Halsey. "This isn't just behavioral. This is bond-based recovery." That became the new routine. Each day, Eric returned. He read. He talked. Sometimes he simply sat in silence. Ash would curl beside him, inching closer each time. One day he brushed his flank along Eric's boot as he passed, a touch so brief, yet so profound it felt like a signature. Soon, Ash began to allow brief contact during feeding. He stopped flinching at medical checkups, but only if Eric was present. "You're his bridge," Karen told Eric one evening. "Whatever he went through, whatever broke inside him, you're the only part of that moment he's willing to carry forward." Eric nodded, "Because I was the only part that didn't hurt." By the 6th week, Ash had transformed. He walked without hesitation. He responded to feeding schedules. He even tolerated a second handler, so long as Eric was nearby. The burns had mostly healed. The limp was gone. His fur was beginning to grow back along the scarred flank, revealing a distinct streak that shimmered under the light like ash against bark. But a difficult conversation loomed. His health qualifies him for rewilding, Dr. Halsey stated during a staff meeting. Behaviorally, it's complicated. Karen frowned. He's functional. Yes. But what happens when we remove Eric from the picture? We don't know if his recovery is sustainable on its own. Silence filled the room. Releasing him too soon, she continued, might undo everything. But keeping him here could block his instinct. He's still a wild animal. They decided on a test, a week without Eric. No visits. No interaction. No scent carryover. Day 1, Ash paced for hours. Day 2, he refused food. Day 3, he clawed at the door. Once. Day 4, he lay motionless in the far corner, the exact posture he had arrived in. Karen called it. "Bring him back." The day Eric returned, Ash didn't rush the door. He didn't cry or claw. He simply stood as Eric entered, walked toward him, and pressed his side against the man's boot, one slow, silent motion that carried more weight than any sound. Eric knelt, rubbing behind Ash's ears. "You held on," he whispered. "You stayed." Karen watched from the observation window, arms folded tight. "I don't think he's dependent," she said aloud, mostly to herself. "I think he made a choice." Later that week, Eric sat with Ash as twilight pooled along the floor. They watched the light shift. They didn't speak. Finally, Eric asked the question out loud, "Do you want to go back?" Ash didn't answer, of course, but he turned his head just slightly toward the forest visible through the high ventilation slats. Then he turned back and stayed. Spring had melted most of the snow from the hills behind the center. The trees were full of sound again. Birds, wind, life. It was the kind of day where the sky looked too blue to be real, and the kind of day when goodbyes often happen. Eric stood at the rear gate of the rehabilitation field zone. Beyond the fencing lay a transitional area, 2 acres of monitored wilderness, designed to let animals reacclimate before full release. Ash stood beside him. No collar, no restraints, just a bobcat, strong, scarred, and whole again. Karen stepped beside Eric with a clipboard. "You're sure you want to do this now?" Eric didn't take his eyes off Ash. "I'm not doing anything." "He is." The gate swung open with a soft metal click. Ash didn't bolt. He didn't hesitate. He simply walked forward, quiet, measured steps into the tall grass. Eric and Karen watched from behind the wire. Ash paused near the tree line, looked back once, and disappeared into the green. No drama. No chase. Just gone. Eric stayed at the gate for a long time after that. Karen brought him coffee. They didn't speak much. Words didn't really work for what they were feeling. 2 days passed. then 3. Ash didn't return. Motion sensors caught glimpses of movement. A blur here, a shadow there. But no confirmed sightings. That was how it was supposed to be. Wild animals weren't meant to be pets or companions. They were meant to be free. But on the 7th morning, as the fog lifted and dew clung to the grass, something appeared, just outside the wire. Ash. He wasn't limping. He wasn't injured. He wasn't desperate. He was checking in. Eric opened the gate, stepped out slowly, and sat on a low wooden platform. Ash came within 10 feet, close enough to be seen, not touched. Then he chirped, just once. Eric smiled. "You're doing okay." Ash blinked, his now familiar signal, and disappeared again. From that day forward, he came back every week. Always in the morning. Always silent. Always just far enough to remain wild, but close enough to remind Eric he remembered. It had been 6 months since Ash's release. His visits had become ritual, every Sunday morning just after sunrise. He'd appear near the edge of the forest, sit quietly for a few minutes, and vanish again into the trees. Sometimes Eric spoke to him. Sometimes he didn't. But on the first Sunday of October, something was different. The cameras picked up his silhouette early, closer than usual. Eric was already outside with a thermos of coffee, sitting on the platform. He didn't need the alert. He could feel it. But this time, Ash wasn't alone. Trailing behind him, small, tentative, and barely tall enough to see over the grass, was a bobcat kitten, weeks old. Fur rough, ears still slightly rounded, eyes too wide for its small face. Eric froze. Ash walked forward confidently, then stopped halfway between the tree line and the platform. The kitten hesitated, clung to the shadows, then darted behind Ash. Ash didn't move. He sat, waited. Eric lowered himself to the ground. For 10 minutes, no one moved. Then the kitten crept forward, 2 steps at a time, then 3 until it stood beside Ash. It didn't look at Eric. It looked up at Ash, and Ash, slowly and gently, nuzzled the kitten's head with his own. Karen stepped outside, stunned. That's not just a wild kitten." "No," Eric said softly. "That's family." Ash didn't stay long. After a few more minutes, he turned and led the kitten back into the woods. No drama. No noise. Just as he always did. But something lingered in the air that day, something that wasn't there before. A sense of continuation. Of legacy. Of returning not just healed, but ready to give back. Later that week, Eric carved a new line into the wooden bench where he and Ash first sat months ago. He came back, and he wasn't alone.